It was a dry noon, the kind that turns the air to haze and makes the earth feel thin and brittle underfoot. The fields outside the village of El Serrano lay quiet, brittle under the baking sun. Wheat stood like golden spears, motionless even in the wind. The farmers, sleeves rolled and brows slick with sweat, worked slower now, not from laziness, but from instinct. The heat had shifted in the last hour. It no longer felt natural. No one noticed the hawk at first. It had appeared high above the edge of the field, circling alone. Not unusual in itself. Hawks were a common sight above the farmland. But this one circled low. Too low for a hunt, too slow for a thermal. Its wings barely moved as it floated in wide, deliberate arcs. Then came the cry. Sharp, repeated, cutting through the shimmering quiet like a whistle on glass. One of the workers, Marla, paused mid-swing with her sickle. She looked up, squinting. "Is it hunting?" a boy beside her asked. Marla didn't answer immediately. The hawk wasn't diving, wasn't scanning the field for rodents. It just circled. Again, 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 and screamed. The sound didn't carry panic. It carried insistence, like a warning. At first, no one paid attention. It was just a bird, after all. But then Marla caught something else, a smell. Faint, but unmistakable. Burning, not wood, not smoke from cooking fires. It was the smell of scorched earth, dry roots and chemical sharpness. And it was coming from the direction the hawk circled over. She dropped her sickle. The others saw her run, past the edge of the rows, toward the dusty stretch beyond the far fence. The hawk screamed louder, flying lower now, wings stretched wide like a banner in alarm. Then she saw it. A crack in the earth, thin, blackened, bleeding warmth, and beneath it, red. Not flames, not yet, but glow. Heat rising from the earth itself, from old roots smoldering in secret. An underground fire. "Back!" she shouted. "Fire under the field!" "Tell the others." The workers dropped tools and ran. Within minutes, the entire field's western side was being evacuated. Buckets, hoses, shouting, and always, the hawk still circling. Its cry didn't stop until the last person had cleared the rows near the cracked earth. Only then did it rise higher and vanish into the blue. By evening, the firefighters said the smoldering layer had likely started days ago, maybe from glass in the field, or a hidden spark after a dry lightning strike. It would have spread silently until the ground itself gave way, if no one had seen it, but someone had, not a person, a hawk. By the time the first responders arrived, the air had shifted, no longer heavy with heat alone, but trembling with the breath of something ancient and hidden. The farmland was still, but beneath the golden crust of dry soil, fire twisted like a silent snake. Marla stood by the edge of the broken earth, the smell of sulfur and burning roots thick in her nostrils. It wasn't smoke, not yet, but something deeper. The ground here had turned brittle. She knelt, touched a nearby patch, and her fingers came away warm. Not surface warmth. This was internal, the kind that pulses from deep cracks, like veins glowing with heat. The hawk had disappeared, but she still felt its presence somehow, like its warning lingered in the pressure of the air. "Careful," said one of the fire marshals as he walked up, visor down and gloves on. "Don't get too close. These underground fires are tricky. They don't behave like surface ones." "You think it's spreading?" she asked. He nodded grimly. "If there's peat, dry roots, mulch, yes. And fast. The fire moves underneath, then pops up somewhere unexpected. It's like chasing a ghost with a blowtorch." Another firefighter, younger, waved them over. "Sir, come take a look at this." They walked 20 meters farther into the field, where wheat once stood in tidy rows. Now, the stalks had darkened at the base, like bruises creeping upward. One section sagged, not yet fallen, but soft, like the fire had eaten its footing. The firefighter prodded the dirt with a metal rod. It sank straight down. "No resistance," he said. "It's hollow underneath." A sinking silence followed. Marla stared across the golden expanse of the fields. Her family's land, and her neighbors too. If the fire wasn't stopped, it wouldn't just destroy crops. It could consume the root network, under all of El Serrano. Worse, no one would see it coming until the ground gave way. She looked back toward the sky, scanning the horizon for feathers. The hawk was gone, but its warning had arrived just in time. Without that strange, circling cry, she would have never walked to that fence. The earth would have broken hours later, with workers still harvesting above it, children playing in the fields, the town's grain stored in the nearby sheds. They say animals feel tremors, the younger firefighter muttered, watching the glowing soil. Like dogs or horses. But birds, Marla nodded slowly. Not all birds. That hawk's lived on these cliffs for years. Maybe she felt the shift in the thermals, or smelled something before we could. The fire marshal radioed in for more reinforcements. As the team began sectioning off the danger zone, Marla remained still, listening not to the radio chatter, but to the earth beneath. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she could almost hear the wings again. The sun beat down with the same intensity, but the land had changed. Where the wheat once rustled in lazy summer breezes, now silence crept, as if the fire beneath had not only consumed the earth, but swallowed the sound itself. Marla stood beside a boundary marker that had been hastily staked into the dirt. Red tape stretched from post to post, fluttering slightly. Behind it, the firefighting crews had begun digging, not to extinguish, but to trace. The fire, they discovered, wasn't in one place. It was moving, underground, invisible to the eye, but feeding on a perfect storm of conditions. Drought-thickened roots, mulch layers, and a rare, shallow layer of peat that hadn't been charted in years. It had caught, likely days ago, and it had traveled far beyond where the hawk had circled. They usually don't burn like this here, said a technician from the environmental team, studying the thermal camera in his hands. This isn't a surface wildfire. It's sub-root combustion. Could have been triggered by a lightning strike days ago, or a buried glass shard magnifying heat. Marla's mind flashed back to the hawk again. How had it known? Across the field, the perimeter widened. Soil testers and emergency geologists surveyed the region. It's dry as paper, one muttered. The roots are the wicks. Children had come to the hill by the road to watch. Parents pulled them back. The older farmers kept silent, watching not the ground, but the sky. Somewhere in the back of everyone's minds, the bird remained. The strange hawk whose behavior had begun the evacuation. It hadn't been coincidence. Marla was sure of it now. She remembered something her grandmother once told her while planting. Animals don't speak. They remember. But perhaps this hawk had done both. A mechanic ran up to her, out of breath. The silo near the edge. The metal's hot. Too hot. She didn't hesitate. She ran. The metal grain silo sat just at the edge of the cracked zone. She placed her hand against it carefully and recoiled. It burned through the glove. "Get the grain out of there," she yelled, "and check underneath." That heat isn't from the sun. The crew leapt into motion, using long hooks and levers to open vents and shift the weight. When they cracked open the lowest hatch, a wave of smoke burst out. Not flames, but steam, thick with carbon and the scent of scorched grain. If it had stayed sealed a few more hours, the pressure would have caused it to explode. She turned to the distant sky. Still no hawk. Just empty blue, but that single cry from earlier that day had changed everything. It had been the first clue, a signal not of panic, but of precision. A bird that knew something was wrong, not through reason, but through a long memory of wind, of heat, of how the earth is supposed to feel. And today, it had felt wrong. By late afternoon, a tense quiet had spread across El Serrano. The wind that usually swept over the hills had died completely, replaced by a thick, unmoving warmth. Dust clung to the air. The fields, once golden and alive, looked pale and brittle, not burned, but exhausted. Marla sat on the tailgate of a volunteer's truck, boots caked in red dust, watching as more crews arrived from neighboring towns. Heavy equipment rolled in, trenchers, soil probes, backup water tanks. The field had become a war zone. Only the enemy wasn't visible. It whispered beneath their feet. 3 new sink spots near the eastern fence, a firefighter reported. We've cordoned them off, but the heat keeps spreading sideways. If it crosses into the orchard lines, we've got another problem. The orchard, a mile downhill, dry bark, oily leaves, perfect fuel. Marla clenched her jaw. Then we need to stop it here. But how do you stop something you can't see? She looked to the sky again. Still no hawk. A strange heaviness settled in her chest. It wasn't just worry, it was absence. That bird's presence had somehow grounded her, like it had been the one thing in this mess that understood. That hawk had seen the danger before any of them had sounded the alarm. And now, with the worst possibly coming, it was gone. Or so she thought. A shrill cry broke through the heat. One short, sharp note. She jumped to her feet. There, above the fence line, circling fast, low, the hawk had returned. But it wasn't circling the same field. It had moved farther east. Marla's breath caught. She followed its pattern. The bird made no random loops. It focused on one stretch of land behind the second grain silo, the oldest structure on the property. And then it stopped flying. The hawk landed, perched atop the metal arm of a broken irrigation pole, and remained absolutely still. Marla broke into a sprint. The earth in that corner looked fine. That's what terrified her. She knelt, pressed her hand against the base of the pole. No heat, no vibration, nothing. But she'd learned to trust what wasn't seen. She called to a nearby team. Bring the probe, deep setting. They drove the steel shaft into the soil. It stopped shallow. Second probe, farther right. Same result. On the third attempt, the shaft dropped 2 meters in with a sucking thud. The soil had collapsed beneath. The fire had eaten the root system, right beneath the silo, exactly where the hawk had landed. Evacuate the equipment. Get everyone clear, Marla shouted. That ground's going to fall. And moments later, it did. With a low, groaning rumble, the earth beneath the metal silo slumped downward like deflated lungs. The silo tilted, groaned, and crashed sideways into the hollow ground, splitting open at the base. Dust and grain spilled in a wave across the broken roots. No flames, not yet, but one spark would have turned it into a fireball. The silo lay on its side now, half buried in the sinkhole, twisted and ruptured like a crushed can. The sound of groaning metal had echoed across the fields, drawing even the distant villagers toward the safety perimeter. But what no one could ignore, no matter how many machines roared or voices called, was the hawk. Still there, still watching. It hadn't flown away after the collapse. It remained perched on that crooked irrigation pole, unbothered by the heat, the chaos, the alarms. Its head tilted, eyes sharp, focused, as if waiting for something. Marla approached again, slow this time, boots crunching dry soil. She didn't want to spook it, not because she feared it, but because she trusted it. And she felt somehow that if it flew off now, they might miss something. The hawk shifted slightly on its perch. She looked down. The soil around the collapsed silo had begun to breathe, faint pulsing movements, like lungs beneath the surface. Then she saw it. Steam. A thin wisp rising not from the crack, but from the far edge of the sinkhole, as if the fire had changed direction. No, not again, she muttered, backing up. The crews had just finished dousing that side with water. They thought it was safe. It wasn't. She spun and waved. Get the thermal back here. It's not done. It's moved again. The hawk cried once, not shrill, but flat and firm, like punctuation. Then it rose, wings wide, and flew just 30 feet to the east. It landed on another pole, another unmarked patch, another part of the field no one had touched yet. Marla's breath caught. It's tracking it. Not circling anymore. It's marking. The fire marshal jogged over, handheld scanner in tow. We've got a heat bloom, he confirmed. That bird's not just guessing. It's following where the temperature's spiking beneath the surface. By now, the rest of the crew, Firefighters, volunteers, even the news van crew that had arrived were watching the hawk. It would perch, pause, move again. Not fast, not frantic, measured. And every time it landed, the ground below registered hotter. Marla whispered to herself, "It's drawing the map." That night, long after dusk, they worked by floodlight. The hawk had gone, finally, just after sunset. But in its final flight, it had stopped at 5 points around the field. Those 5 points became the new priority zones. And within 24 hours, heat scans confirmed them all. Pockets of combustion hidden in soil, no deeper than a man's chest. Any one of them could have flared up and swallowed half the property. But they didn't. Because the hawk, the bird that had once circled alone above the silence, had stayed, had watched, had refused to leave until its message was complete. By morning, the hawk was gone, this time for good. No one had seen it leave. No one knew where it had flown to, or whether it would return. But its trail remained, not just in memory, but in the flags now staked in the earth, each marking a hotspot it had predicted. The firefighters had begun to call them hawk points. Marla stood at the edge of the last one, watching as the ground team dug into the scorched underlayer. Thick smoke rose in coils, hissing like steam off volcanic rock. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't fiery, but it was deadly. The fire had been quiet, patient, and cunning, traveling through roots and mulch, sometimes bypassing entire sections, then doubling back like it had a mind of its own. And yet, a bird had seen what no scanner had. The techs with their drones had tried to replicate the hawk's path, mapping thermals, tracking wind patterns, but even they admitted quietly that the bird hadn't followed any logical model. It had sensed something else. Pressure, heat gradients, vibration, or maybe memory. Marla thought back to her grandmother again, and that old belief that some animals remembered not just events, but places. Maybe that hawk had seen this fire before, she muttered aloud, watching the smoke rise. Not this one, but a fire like it, in the roots, in the land. Long ago, the fire marshal approached, carrying a sooty clipboard. "We've got it mostly contained," he said. Still smoldering under the third silo, but no signs of spread. She exhaled, but didn't celebrate. Mostly contained still meant risk. Still meant a town watching its breath. Still meant fields they couldn't replant for years. And still, no hawk. They found something strange later that afternoon, beneath one of the marked hotspots. A small, blackened object, curved, hardened. At first, they thought it was debris, metal, but when they pulled it out, dusted it off, and washed it in a tin basin, they realized it was a bird's talon, fossilized in pitch-black stone, older than any fire, older than the town. An environmental tech later confirmed it, likely the talon of a raptor species extinct in the region for centuries. They had dug up the past, and the land had remembered. Or maybe been reminded. The sun set on the 7th day, casting long shadows across a field that no longer smoldered. What remained were scorched trenches, collapsed silos, and dozens of colored flags standing like silent sentinels over the land. The threat had passed, but something deeper had taken root. Not fire, not fear, but memory. The people of El Serrano never saw the hawk again. Some claimed it was a ghost bird, the spirit of the land made winged flesh. Others said it was a rare migratory raptor, drawn by instinct and heat. Scientists suggested behavior anomalies. Reporters hunted metaphors. But for those who lived it, for Marla, the volunteers, the firefighters, and the children who now whispered the tale to each other on walks home from school, the hawk became something else. A warning, a guardian, a legend. In the weeks that followed, the town held a quiet gathering at the hill overlooking the fields. No speeches, just stillness. Marla placed the fossilized talon in a wooden box beneath a flat stone, marking it not with a name, but with a carved image of wings outstretched, pointing east. They planted windgrass where the fields had burned. Not crops, not for harvest. Just something that would move when the wind returned. And it did, in time. One evening, a child walking the upper trail saw another bird, not the same, but similar. A hawk, alone, silent, perched on a pole. It didn't cry, it didn't circle. It simply looked down, as if checking, as if remembering.